Series 4 of the 50 Faces podcast is sponsored by Baillie Gifford. Baillie Gifford is a long-term investment manager dedicated to discovering the innovations and change makers that deliver exceptional growth opportunities for its clients.
Slow down, be more patient, live in the moment. Relationships are important. You want to foster them and nurture them and grow them, but at the same time, they're going to come and go. But you definitely want to be thoughtful about who you bring into your world, who you surround yourself with, and be intentional about those people that you bring into your life.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Jon Salstrom, who's Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer at the Cincinnati Retirement System, a role he's held for almost 2 years. He previously worked in a series of consulting and financial analyst roles. Welcome, Jon. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Aoife. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we had a great meeting in Cincinnati not too long ago, and I would love to just continue that now. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up pursuing a role in investment, first of all, and then we can take it into public funds.
Yeah, definitely. Start off, my professional career has definitely been kind of a circuitous one, but to back up and answer the question, I was born in Michigan, grew up in East Lansing. I had fairly hardworking blue collar, upper middle class family with a mom as a school teacher and a dad as a lawyer, with their family being from Indiana and really kind of GM family oriented. So that's where I think my first kind of introduction to capital markets, finance, a businessman, was through my grandparents that worked for GM. So really from an early on point of view, I felt like I was drawn to the capital markets. Maybe finance more specifically at that young age, not knowing capital markets. But, as I grew up in that family and watched the success that my grandparents had, I knew I wanted to kind of attend business school. So I ultimately found myself down at Bloomington at Indiana University studying finance, and then ultimately ended up in Chicago. Now, having that finance degree, I kind of maybe didn't manage my career specifically then and went into a sales role. But after about a couple of years of doing sales and in logistics specifically, I realized that I wanted to kind of pivot and get back into capital markets. And so really started to focus in on an MBA, pursuing an MBA part-time while I was working, as well as a CFA, a Chartered Financial Analyst degree. I knew both of those would kind of help me pivot, and ultimately found myself at Callan Associates. So that's really where I would say kind of my first introduction to institutional asset management began, was with that niche area of institutional consulting. I really feel like that was kind of the formative years of my professional life, really getting good mentorship from the likes of Greg DeForest, Ron Payton, who was there, Jim Callahan, Judy McKinney was in the Chicago office. All of them really kind of helped shape my understanding of capital markets, institutional asset management, manager due diligence, how to work with public pension plans, asset allocation, communicating with staff and boards. So really that's where I say a lot of things kind of came together in my mind and really started to make sense. From there, I did pivot to the buy side a little bit, had roles at JP Morgan here back in the Midwest on their fixed income platform, really servicing a high yield team that was based here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that, again, a good mentorship, I think, from that perspective, as a gentleman named Tim Hollahan really helped shape what, investor relations meant to me. So learning how to manage a book of business, how to deal with clients and answer questions, how to navigate internally and make sure you're communicating with the investment professionals, with management, and then with your clients as well. And then kind of how to be thoughtful about the growth of your book of business, about how managing those clients and the assets you have is really paramount to being successful and being stable, and how to retain people. So again, a very formative time of my career at JP Morgan, really learning a lot about, I think, client service and managing a book of business. Then I spent some time on a more straight distribution roles at firms like Fort Washington here in Cincinnati, and a firm called First Cintier, before ultimately getting presented with opportunity here at the City of Cincinnati Retirement System to kind of come back full circle from my days at Callan Associates and get back to an asset allocator where it's a little bit more mission driven, has a little bit more purpose, I think. And that was one of the things that was very appealing to me. And that and avoiding airplanes every week. So I get to be a little
sure.
bit. So
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you, and you kind of touched on it, that early training in sales and in asset managers. How do you think that taught you to think that you now sometimes bear in mind today as an allocator, allocating to firms like this? You probably have a little bit more sympathy or empathy for their point of view.
oh yeah, absolutely. I try to be very thoughtful with the outreach that I get as far as I get one of the things that Tim Holohan taught me. Make sure you respond, make sure you answer, be kind. You don't necessarily have to take every meeting, but make sure you just respond with a simple, that's not an area of focus right now, but that's one part of, I think, the question. Yes, I think the other part is kind of how do I utilize some of the experience and understanding and tools that were used when I was on kind of a product distribution phase to kind of understand the messaging that I'm getting. And I think it is very helpful to be just efficient with the time you have with managers. I do very much enjoy the small talk, getting to know, developing rapport, but also being very, I think, transparent from an allocator's perspective about what you're looking for, what the third rail might be for you, what are hot topics with the board. Being very open about that and transparent makes for a much more efficient conversation. So that's one thing that I think learned from playing on both sides of the fence.
Absolutely. And you did mention some fantastic legends of the investment consulting world there. So lucky you are to have worked with them. I'd love to now move to, if you could set the scene a little bit for us at the Cincinnati Retirement System. Can you tell us of the size of the fund, that the funding level? I know a sore point maybe in Ohio, certainly it was in Illinois when I occupied a CIO role at the Chicago Police Pension Fund. Then we'll talk about what's on your mind. But if you could just set the scene first, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the City of Cincinnati Retirement System is a $2.4 billion plan. It's two commingled trusts that has a pension plan and a 115 trust, so a healthcare trust. The plan itself has been around since 1931 as a Social Security replacement. We're overseen by a board of trustees of 9 individuals, 4 that are appointed by the mayor, 3 that are elected retirees, and 2 elected active members. And the City of Cincinnati serves as a plan sponsor. It's somewhat of a unique situation in that there was a litigation in 2015. So the governance of the plan, having the board oversee the plan sponsors, we do have a collaborative settlement agreement signed in 2016 as kind of one of our main governing documents, as well as Municipal Administrative Code, Ohio, and federal statutes. The general governance, though, the board of trustees sets the IPS, establishes statement of investment beliefs, the asset allocation. Now we very much, I think, are a modern portfolio theory. We believe in efficient markets with the understanding that there is some behavioral biases that are out there, and we try to construct each asset class with those in mind, ultimately trying to maximize return with a prudent level of risk, and generally defining risk as a permanent loss of capital, but it's very nuanced in risk. As you mentioned, we are an underfunded pension plan, so I'll come back to that question, but the bigger risk I think we have and that we need to be mindful of, and I think might permeate through some of my comments, is liquidity. We have a 7% cash drag as we need to meet monthly pension obligations each month, which is relatively high for a lot of pension plans, relatively high compared to a lot of pension plans. So being able to have the right levers to pull to meet those monthly obligations is paramount to success. So, we're ultimately looking to continue to build a robust and resilient portfolio, that can weather kind of uncertain markets and drawdown periods that are seeing correlations maybe increase between otherwise uncorrelated asset class, whether that be public equity, public fixed income, trying to add uncorrelated returns in there to really kind of build a little bit more stable cash flow efficient model. But to circle back, the plan is 68% funded right now. We've been slowly kind of moving downward from a 77% funded maybe 10 years ago. I will say that with that in mind, that the plan is very much, I think, improving the health. Now, it's always hard to look at a point in time snapshot, depending on whether it's end of year or end of fiscal year number, like 68%. I will say the do nothing approach to the plan, meaning if the plan sponsor had continued to do nothing, moved from us being funded at 20% in 2045 to 40% to 60% this year over the last 3 years. So while the actual funding level is fairly stable at 70, 69, 68, the do nothing kind of scenario is improved as We've done a bunch of work. I shouldn't say the board, myself have worked very tirelessly with the administration, with the council members and the mayor to increase the plan sponsors funding contribution rate. So that's moved from 16% to 18.5%. So all of that has really, really helped stabilize, I think, what might have been an insolvent fund in 20 years. So again, long-winded answer, but the health of the plan is improving, but the funded ratio is fairly stable at 68 and in that kind of danger zone, if you will.
It's really interesting. Just one more question on that, because that actually is quite healthy considering I had inherited a plan that was around the 20% funding level. But yeah, I still walked into that role with ambition and with a sense of what could be accomplished. And the reason I ask that, I think, there are a number of plans now that are well above the 100% level with the movement in rates, particularly in the UK, where many of the listeners of this podcast sit. And I suppose just, it's important, I think, if you can restate your mindset around that 70%, it's not, cause for panic or freezing everything. If you're an open plan, you still have to think about growth. You still have to manage cash flow. Can you think about how you think about that 70% or 68% level? What's your mindset? Is it doom and gloom, or you feel the future is bright?
That's a very interesting question, a very nuanced question in the sense that from my perspective, it is definitely not doom and gloom. There are various stakeholders and various levels of understanding, I think, of what that snapshot in time number means. So I am very much with you that a 68, 69, 70% funding ratio is not doom and gloom. It is probably in a healthy spot. In the way I've tried to generally communicate that with the stakeholders, whether it be participants who are worried about the health of their plan and them getting their benefits in 30 years, and or administration and or the council who's got to make budget decisions each year, is directionally where are we going? You want to be mindful of, are things improving? Are they getting worse? Are people paying attention? And when I say people that have a financial stake in the retirement system. So at 68, I don't think it's on a slippery slope. I do feel, just kind of thinking about the math, the actuaries, if you get below 50, I believe it becomes very, very hard to pay the benefits that are earned in any one year, as well as the unfunded liability for the future. It just becomes too great of a number for a municipality that's relying on tax revenue to pay that. So I tried to make that point, right? Like, we're not in a dangerous spot, but if you stop paying attention and it goes from 70 down to 65 to 60, then you become in a very slippery slope. I also will say the flip side of this, that communicating, like you said, there is bad behavior that can creep in with a plan that's too well funded. Now, that's assuming that there's bad behavior, but at 90, 95, 100%, benefits can get promised that might not be then funded just because you think the 100% funding ratio will last forever. So there is, I think, risk to the other side if you're too well funded and you have a plan sponsor that wants to promise benefits, or a group of retirees wants benefits that might not be very cost prohibitive, or would be cost prohibitive if you instilled them.
It's really interesting. Two interesting things. One is the old private equity concept of the discipline of debt that kept people working hard. Well, the discipline of underfunding, I think, keeps you focused and not doing it profligate behavior. And then you mentioned trajectory of funding level. I think that's so important. This has to be a dynamic. It's not a kind of a snapshot of time. It's a dynamic movement. And I think within that, there's probably some kind of guardrails as well that you can expect it might move around a little, even if the general direction of travel is to improve. I think it's important to have that. Yeah. How does that translate into your asset allocation mix? Anything you're focused on today, doing more of, maybe cash flow generating assets, or anything that you don't do and will never do?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we did when I joined is really kind of focus in on the fixed income portfolio. Now, the plan had a fairly aggressive risk profile, and we're fairly underweight fixed income to the tune of maybe a 15% allocation. That paid dividends are really helped as a tailwind to the overall performance of the fund as we're in a zero rate interest environment. As those rates kind of reset in 22, we were able to increase that fixed income allocation, use a little bit of active management there. So we talk about passive versus active. We're fairly passive on the equity side, U.S. equities, but want to utilize a little bit of active management there, as well as build out a private credit book of business there. So really moving that from about a 1% position to a 6.5% position. At the same time we were doing that, as I first came on, really wanted to churn the yield on our real estate as well as our infrastructure book of business. So again, trying to increase the cash flow of the overall plan was kind of first and foremost what we're trying to do, understanding is what we've just talked about, that a 7% crash drag on the portfolio with contributions maybe not being where they need to be from the plan sponsor. We really wanted to focus on building a more robust portfolio. The other area of where I'm looking is kind of those uncorrelated returns. So I very much feel we would like to add a hedge fund allocation. We don't have one. We'll do an asset liability study at the end of the year with Marquette, our consultant, and hopefully add a hedge fund just to do two things, kind of build in more robust, resilient portfolio, a little bit better all weather. I'm looking for something to add protection in events like 2022, where you have both U.S. equities and U.S. fixed income kind of selling off in tandem. So your traditional passive 60-40 portfolio really underperforms in 2022. Really want to build guardrails against that. So I think that's really first and foremost what we need to do, as we might be in an environment where rates stay kind of high for longer, maybe a leveling out or a slowing down in the economy. I mean, that's borderline stagflation, and we just feel like we need a little bit more defenses in the portfolio.
Quite a lot on your mind then in that case, I think, is that then just in terms of some of the other issues, you are a public plan, you have stakeholders, you have governance that can be optimal or less according to what we see in different systems. Can you just tell us how your governance works? And also then whether you have any stakeholders or whether it's an objective or a goal to invest in diverse managers, to have an ESG approach or overlay or local focus or impact?
The governance is essentially the board of trustees, with the help of Marquette, our consultant, will set the asset allocation. Generally speaking, that's done every 3 to 5 years. With the speed at which I think markets are evolving, I would push to do that every 3 years, and that's what we're going to do at the end of this year. So once the asset allocation target is set by the board of trustees, they really look for staff, myself, and Marquette to fill those allocations. So when you think about structure and design within each asset class, as well as biases that you want to have put in there, and that's really on Marquette and I to bring recommendations to the board. The governance had been kind of that traditional. Marquette would bring 3 or 4 managers for the board to review and have a typical finals presentation. We have pivoted over the last couple of years and kind of made it where Marquette and I will do the due diligence and then bring a recommendation as far as what we think the structures would look like and what those managers are. I believe the board's much more appreciative of that approach. And if they feel like something's maybe a little too esoteric or doesn't quite fit what they thought a certain asset class should look like, or a manager might be maybe not developed enough, then we would definitely exclude them or bring back other ideas to the board. The board has charged Marquette and myself as far as kind of manager due diligence. So kind of getting back to the diversity, equity, inclusion question, and do we look to hire local managers or minority-owned, women-owned firms? They very much want Marquette and myself to kind of do that due diligence. They haven't ever put anything into the investment policy statement as a formal policy, but they also realize that there is value in kind of diversity of thought, making sure that these managers are doing the right things without actually taking a firm stance on it. So we will bring local managers and women minority-owned managers, and then making sure that we feel that's, when I say we, I mean Marquette and myself, feel that we do have managers that are being very thoughtful about how they build teams, how they look to incorporate that diversity of thought throughout to make sure they're making informed decisions that benefit everybody. So just trying to make sure that the level playing field, that the ultimate goal is being fulfilled, as well as making sure we're hiring the right manager. They're making thoughtful decisions.
Fantastic. But I'd love to move to some personal reflections now. So having had a career on many sides of the table, did you have any setbacks or challenges throughout that career that you learned lessons from that you now apply today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit. I think early on, when I kind of went from Indiana University, a finance degree, into a sales role, I think more or less just geographically wanting to get to Chicago and be close to my friends outside of college and not being very thoughtful about where I went. The career management, I think, became very important and useful in the sense that you need to be thoughtful and intentional about what you're doing and kind of what your tasks are. So that was an early lesson for me, that career management can be very important, that you need to be thoughtful about where you want to be. and not just thoughtful, but intentional. So having a 1 year plan, a 3 year plan, a 5 year plan, being intentional about the people that you network with and look to surround yourself with is all very important. So that was one of the lessons I feel like I kind of learned early on and try to implement that throughout my career. As you're well aware, sometimes that works better than others. Specifically, I think I learned a lot, as we've already talked about at Callan Associates. A, I had great mentors while I was there, but B, I also was in fixed income manager research during the global financial crisis. So I think I learned valuable lessons on what due diligence is, what manager due diligence is, and how to not be seduced, if you will, by various storytelling and or presentations, risk systems that are very colorful and show nice reports, but maybe the math behind it isn't all that efficient or giving you good data. So during that process, I think I've learned to be a little bit more cynical, a little bit more specific with questions. And so that was a great lesson too. So those are probably the two things that stand out as far as career management, being intentional, having plans, being strategic with your thoughts, and then kind of managing due diligence during the global financial crisis. That was fairly eye-opening.
Do you have any particular causes that are close to your heart or interests that you like to further through your professional career or beside it?
Yeah, so I think professionally, one of the appealing aspects about the City of Cincinnati and working for the retirement plan has been that it's mission driven, right? There's a ton of pride that myself and the 14 members that serve in the retirement system have for what we deliver to the participants, to the members. That financial security that they all feel as you deliver their pension benefits, I think that resonates. It means a lot. So in that sense, just doing the job, I think, is one of the greatest causes we have, or that myself feel, and I know the staff feels. But along that same lines is then just kind of financial education, ensuring that we do everything we can. I mean, we've talked a lot about the investment side of things. We've talked a lot about the governance side of things. One of the other aspects of being within public pension is the customer service side of things, right? So the financial literacy that you're trying to instill in all members, and these are city workers, sanitation workers, utility workers, that you're trying to educate them on how to live a fulfilled life in retirement. So really leaning into that, I think, has been one of the goals that we've had since I've started. Is obviously I touched on the litigation in 2015 that created some level of distrust between members and the plan sponsor. So I think since before me, but really with me, trying to increase that transparency, make sure the members know that I'm on their side, that it's not me versus them. That's been paramount, I think, to the success of the group over the last couple of years, making sure that transparency is there, that education is there. Personally, as we've talked about previously before this call, I have 2 teenage kids. Very much spend most of my time with them when I'm not at work, whether that's running around to activities or just ensuring that I'm trying to raise thoughtful, well-resourced, educated kids. I think they're acutely aware of where we are as a society, more so than maybe we are as adults, and what it means to have 7, 8 billion people on this planet. Sustainability, they fully understand that. So very much like to work with them as far as building a garden in our yard, trying to be thoughtful about how we approach our lives. So those are where we're at. It's just really trying to make sure my kids are grounded, thoughtful, kind individuals. So those are the 2 goals.
I love that. Well, my last question is around words of wisdom, and I think you've already littered the conversation with a few of them. But is there anything you can leave us with in terms of a creed or motto or advice for your younger self?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you a couple, and then I might circle back to the younger self. I mean, I think the mottos that jump out to me that I use a lot are be more curious than certain. I think that encourages collaboration, adaptability, humility, and then somewhat counter to that. And this is kind of a philosophy that kind of runs through my life, is just having balance, call it yin and yang, or know your inside self, know the outside world. Is more is lost by indecision than wrong decision. So while those two sometimes might conflict with each other, I generally like both of those mottos and phrases. I think if you ask me on the investment side of things, I probably lean to the be more curious than certain. And then on the operations side of my brain that I have to implement as the executive director is more is lost by indecision than wrong decision. My younger self, I think, again, it's one of those things where I don't think that my younger self would listen to this advice, but it's try to slow down, be more patient, live in the moment. Relationships are important. You want to foster them and nurture them and grow them, but at the same time, they're going to come and go. But you definitely want to be thoughtful about who you bring into your world, who you surround yourself with, and be intentional about those people that you bring into your life.
Well, Jon, I was most struck by what you said about the ton of pride you bring to the work you do. I think that is very rarely stated and is often underappreciated. And it is that mission that the public servants like yourself bring to this work that is why such good is done and why these funds are thriving. I'm going to go back to Charles Dickens' quote about Cincinnati, which I admit I'm just reading for the first time. A beautiful city, cheerful, thriving, and animated. And I think thanks to you and the work you're doing, we now know that the pensions of the retirement systems are in good hands. So thank you so much for coming here and sharing your insights with us.
Oh, thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and look forward to talking again soon.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all of our content on the 50 Faces Hub, where you'll find a library of role models, resources, and other solutions to enhance your career. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.